Hi, good evening. Welcome to CCA Tel Aviv-Yafo. My name is Nicola Trezzi. I'm the director of the center. We are here tonight for an artist talk by Daniel Silver, whose solo exhibition is opening tonight, following this talk. And the format of the artist talk will be less traditional. I'll be here with Daniel and we'll do some questions and it will be more open. So it will be super interesting, I'm sure. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the people that made this exhibition possible. This exhibition is in the making for a few years, and I'm so glad that it's finally happening. So the people I want to thank are Wendy Fisher and the Kirsch Foundation, Susie Chama, Fleet Street Gallery in London that represents Daniel's work, and Ongi and Dani Ungar. And I also want to thank Iris Rifkin Benzur and Eran Benzur, and Outset that always gives us great hospitality to the artists we invite to Tel Aviv to work with us. Before we really start with the talk, I just want to give you a brief introduction about how this evening will go, and use this opportunity to share with you my path with Daniel. So I discovered Daniel's work in 2006, so some years ago, as a student in Milan, studying at the Academy of Fine Art. At the time, Daniel was showing with the gallery, Galleria Susi Sciamma. She's also supporting the exhibition, so it all comes together. And after discovering his work, Daniel and I worked several times, and what is so special is that every time was in a different format. And come people, there's a chair here and there's a chair there. Please have a seat. There's a chair also there, maybe. Yeah, great. So since discovering his work, we work first with Flash Art, which is a contemporary art magazine. And I involved Daniel in a conversation with the other 3 Israeli artists that are living not in Israel. So it was an interesting way to look at contemporary diaspora. And then Daniel was very kind to come to Bezalel when I was directing the MFA program, and he met the students, and he also did a wonderful workshop making heads with the clay with the children that the Rothschild Foundation brought from different areas of the city. And now is the 3rd chapter through exhibition. So first writing, then teaching, now it's exhibition making, and I'm sure there will be more. I need to figure out myself, because he's always the same, but I need to see what I will do next time. So I'm very happy about this, and the talk will actually cover more or less 20 years of practice, so it's a nice journey. And again, I hope Daniel will speak most of the time, but I'll be here to kind of keep company and ask questions, or So, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Daniel, who worked so with such good spirit to make the exhibition possible. It's not easy for us to take this huge ceramic figures to Tel Aviv from London. Looks easy, but it's not. So I'm very happy that Daniel was with us throughout. And also I want to thank my team, because they really, all of them work very, very hard on this project. So, okay, let's start. Okay. So I think, see if your microphone is working.
Is it working?
Yeah, it is. Okay. So we will start with this project, a house for sculpture. And actually, I just want to ask Daniel, because me as somebody working with artists, I never see myself related to a specific medium. You know, some curators, they specialize in photography, in performance, gender. You know, I'm not this kind, but I'm always intrigued by artists that are so devoted to one language. And I think in the case of Daniel, I think his devotion to sculpture and what it means, how it changed throughout the history of humankind. It's fascinating. So, I mean, house for sculpture. This is kind of such a statement. So I would like to hear from him, of course, about the project, but also the title and his relationship to this medium. From the beginning to now.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Nicola. Thank you for bringing me here, and I really enjoy working with you, and it's very hands-on. So Nicola was here lifting the sculptures and placing them, so we work very much together. I'm very interested in sculpture, in the history of sculpture, sculpture as we know it today, sculpture throughout history, through thousands of years. I think I'm very interested in the idea of making, and making with the hand. Now, Nicola chose the images, not me, and Nicola as well chose that they're all institutional shows, so there's no gallery shows, and he's got an idea how it all connects to the show here, but we'll see that through. So this is New Contemporaries in 2001 in Camden Art Centre. And New Contemporaries is something that happens in the UK, where every year graduates can apply for this exhibition, which is selected by practicing artists, and then it becomes a show. The year of my selection, it was Mike Nelson, Chris O'Feely, and Jennifer Hickey's. And I say this because I had a tutorial with Mike Nelson when I was at the Royal College, and I made objects. I made these sculptures. And when you make sculptures, you don't know where to put them, what to do with them. So, in modern times, people put them on bases, but over the last 20 years, they went to the floor. And I asked Mike what to do with these works. And Mike said, where do they fit? I said, in a house. So he said, okay, so build a house. And that's how I built this house. And this house is on wheels, and it's nomadic. And this house became a structure, a place for placing the works, but at the same time, understanding the works. So you could walk inside between the works, look at the works on them. So it had like a tree house thing to going in with it as well. And if we move to the next, this is another house. This is in Berlin. So people that don't know, I was born in London and grew up in Jerusalem, and then went to study in London. And then I came back for a year, and this was just around the time I came back, and I was thinking about decision making, about going to places, doing things, making decisions. So what I did here is I built a kind of a house or a kind of bunker where I wanted to put decision makers or back in the place where they. So if we can imagine this kind of outskirts of Berlin, which was these very barren buildings, and there was this house there for them to go back to the place where they made the decision about placing people. And in this bunker there were sculptures. The image on the right, you see there's a clay figure with muesli and threads, so, and a daybed, so a place for reflection.
I think we'll come later on speaking about your interest in monuments, or maybe, let's say, three-dimensional objects that are not necessarily understood, or they were not necessarily created as art, but already I think in this project I want to ask you, do you think sculpture was something that interests you because of the many possibilities that it can take? Because when we think about sculpture, we can really think about, especially today, monuments that we see on the street, or a sculpture that we see in a museum, or in a garden, or even in our house. I mean, this is, it's somehow, it's a kind of language that takes many, almost can wear many hats and can be many things. So I wonder, I mean, if this was in your mind when you were working on these two projects and later on.
I think that I'm very interested in making, and making with the hand. Making. I think there was a moment when I was studying at the Slade where you had to decide in those days, do you go to painting or do you go to sculpture? And it's a life or death decision. And I didn't know if I should go downstairs to sculpture or stay in painting. But there was an artist called Philida Barlow teaching sculpture. And for her, it was very clear that I come down to do sculpture. And that's what I did. And I am a maker, and I think it's easier to make when you've got the whole world to make in. Where if you're a painter, you're always stuck into the frame. You have to manage yourself within that. Within the world of making sculpture, I think what we'll see next is that there's a reference to history.
Yeah,
So around this time, I had a Henry Moore residency in Sunderland, and Sunderland have a history of boat making, and I was buying wooden tools, carving tools, and they offered me a show, and I wanted to start carving in stone, and I ended up remembering that as a child we'd go to Zimbabwe, which is, the translation of Zimbabwe is House of Stone, and I always wanted to collaborate with the local artisans there. So for this show I took images to Zimbabwe, and we carved 80 stones into this body of work. And this was the first time I carved in stone, so I'm not an artisan. I treated the stone in the same way that I would treat polystyrene or wood, and in the beginning they were laughing at me that I was breaking the chisels all the time. But afterwards it kind of changed. But it was interesting as well because the people I was working with are used to making, say, rhinos and not these kind of modernist-looking heads. And I brought Western art books to show them my references, which were not theirs, were very clear mine. And it was a very interesting discussion about sculpture between us.
Can you tell us about the title?
I think it was very much about like a forest of heads on the one hand, but a kind of democracy and, a people that you walk into, and there's different things happening. But then I showed it again, if we can move.
Yes, of course.
I showed it the same works again. I just changed the colors of the bases. I showed them in Camden Art Center, and the title of the show was Heads, because more and more I became fascinated with the idea of the bust as an object, the head as an object in sculpture, which has the most information in it.
Maybe we will see it also in the next project. Maybe you can tell us, and it started already with the house. I almost feel the house shrank and became a pedestal. I mean, somehow there's this, your sculptures are very often coming with support, but the support is part of the work. And again, I would like that you, if you could say, if this was something you did sort of intuitively, or it was like a plan, and also what is the dialogue in the making between the support and the object? I mean, it's the same thing because they come together, but one's wonder whether the pedestal came first or the head came first, and how they found each other, which plinth choose the head or the other way around. And I think I always feel your work has a high degree of playfulness, although it's so serious and heavy at the same time, but there's something really playful. And I think this idea of making with the hands, it brings together, so many different ranges of people, from kids to, to the whole life. We all will spend our life doing this. At least I hope we do. I mean, we should make sure we do. So if you can tell us.
So I studied in the 90s, and the people that taught me were very interested in taking the sculpture off the pedestal and putting it on the floor. But then so a base was a no-no, because the idea of the pedestal is that it's like a wall. You don't see it. It's white and it's invisible.
Yeah.
But then, in the 80s, 90s, a sculpture became everything and could go on the floor. But then I found that I was making objects that want to be seen at a certain height and want a certain kind of relationship with us, which means they have to be somewhere around where a pedestal is. And it was a very big battle to say, I want to put things on a pedestal, because it was against everything I was educated about. So then I said, this pedestal is not a pedestal anymore, it's a body. And I asked that part of the body what it wants. And that part of the body informed the head. So it became a context, it became, sometimes I would dress it in clothes or in fabric, so that became a kind of place for the work. And this show in Switzerland, I kind of played around with the space that it's maybe more architectural, like a city space.
Actually, we'll see later on how what you're saying, that the pedestal is actually the body, we'll see how it developed. But before that, maybe we can do, since I told you we have many years of collaboration, I actually want to ask you about your relationship with materials. Because Daniel, of course, is, because of the relationship to sculpture, then you have certain materials that come to mind, whether it's wood or rock or marble, as we will see. And I mean, this exhibition in Italy, it's in a specific place that has a relationship to ceramic, and so, and I know that it's also through Italy, his relationship to Italy came the use of marble. So I really would like to, if you could share your relationship and how the materials are talking to you in different ways.
So this show in Faenza, Nicolo, as you were from Italy, can you explain that Faenza is where the Romans used to make ceramics, right?
Yeah, it's there's this long tradition.
So
I think it's even the Etruscan.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
it's you know, this history of before Italy was Italy somehow, but was already Italy. But okay,
so
this is for a different lecture or something.
So I was invited by Matteo Zauli, who's the son of Carlo Zauli. Carlo Zauli was a ceramic artist in Italy who made very sculptural work. And there's a residency which is really beautiful, but what was very interesting is that Carlo Zauli bought a lot of black clay when he was alive, and he stored it underneath the studios, and it was there for 20 years. And when I came, Matteo, the son, said, "You'd love this clay because it's very sculptural. It's very, you can work with it. It's very thick and strong and holds itself." And that's where I started working with this black clay from that Matteo gave. And as well, the works there's some heads, and which were very much at the time I was thinking about condensing information into an object. And at the background there are smaller objects which are similar to what's happening on the tables in this show. And I showed all the work in the studios using their bases and pedestals, and fabrics as well. There's fabrics on the walls which you can see on the left. We're all part of it. And these works were glazed, different from the works in the show now. These works were glazed. And in a way, I left. This was 10 years ago, and I came back to clay maybe only 4 years ago.
Yeah, but in a different way, because I mean, we will see later. These are there's no glaze, but they are painted. So, okay. Next project, I feel this is such an important project for you. I think it's a project that really gave us. I mean, I didn't see it in person, but I've seen many images and read about it. It's a project that really gave us a sort of glimpse into your head, I would say, to use a part of the body that is dear to you. We really could enter inside the head of Daniel Silver and understand what's going on, or trying to. So please tell us about the dig.
The dig happened it's a project that happened next to Tottenham Court Road with a art production organization called Art Angel. And Art Angel's idea is that they do projects with artists outside of the gallery space. So the question is always, what can we do with you that is not fitting for a gallery? And I worked very close with James Lingwood, and the starting point for this project were objects from Sigmund Freud's collection. Sigmund Freud was an obsessive collector of Greco-Roman objects, and he had them in his office, on his desk, and I was lucky enough to get access and took photograph of all his cabinets, and I decided that to understand them, I'll sculpt them. I'll copy them in clay, enlarge them. And then I had this database of sculptures in my studio, and we were trying to figure out how will we show them, what will they be. And we looked at different spaces, and then this space, which I remembered, which was next to the Slade where I studied, which was a car park in the center of London, and we got access to it, and we built this narrative around the three diggers. The archaeologist as a digger, the psychoanalyst as a digger, and the sculptor as a digger. So you walked in and it looked like an archeological dig, and you walked out, which is that there, objects, broken objects, standing objects. At the back it looked a bit like a, sculpture shop or display. And then you had these objects here, which were the smoking silver father figures, which I made a year or two before in bronze. And all this water was there. And it ended up, again, with a reclining figure, reflecting, but at the same time having a landscape growing on him or with him, and what could be Freud at the background. And I think what this project did is cemented my interest in objects which are from a different time, but we understand them today, and we can try and understand what it was like to be human then through those objects, which then takes us to
the next. But before we move to this, which I think it's very good transition, but I think just for you to understand, of course Daniel had this opportunity to access the collection of Freud, but also it's possible to also sort of go into the head of Freud by going to the Freud Museum in London, where you can see the studio and the carpet he put on the bed where the patient would lie, and you know the story. I don't need to tell you about psychoanalysis, but I think this idea of, and you said cemented, and to go to this place from like this very saturated with carpets and colors, and move to this pure cemented car park where you also see this reclining figure. And I want to say that one of Daniel's first exhibitions, the title was Buddha on a chaise longue.
Buddha and the chaise longue. Yeah.
So I think it's recurring. I want to maybe, if you could tell us, and I think here it will come back, do you see autobiographical elements? I mean, these work are so far from, when we imagine autobiographical works, we imagine something different. At least I do. Mm-hmm. Here is so universal, and yet I wonder, if you see, if there's your life comes, or
I think in these works which we're showing now, I can't really relate to it, but in the show here, the chorus can relate to like a story I had when I was I think 12, and they invited, someone came to my school in Jerusalem and invited us to take part in a chorus, to take part in, it was called Pirchei Yerushalayim, and I straight away put my hand up because I wanted to sing, and I, would go and sing, but I think I annoyed the solo singer because I always sang when it was his time to sing. And I think if I don't remember correctly, I forgot the story. But I think I was kicked out. But so the chorus there has a link to my my history, my life.
Yeah.
This work was first, it's called Rock Formations. It was part of parkour at Art Basel. And what we could do here is we could show my sculptures within the archeological museum. And what's nice is that so my works are the gold head and the white ones, but they really fit in within the museum, as if they are really part of them. And I think this really worked for me, but after this show I kind of felt I need to take a break from that
from archaeology.
Yeah,
from
this kind, from being so explicit. It was like, okay, I've done that. It looked really good. It really made sense, but it ended with that. And and from then, I stopped. I did work with marble, but slowly I migrated away because I kind of felt that that chapter ended.
It was the peak of this relationship. I just want, because we have known each other for many years now, I want to just say it's a story, but for me it was so important, and it relates also to the works in the exhibition, because I visited Daniel in London a few years ago. It was even before I was working here. I think I was still working at Bezalel, and I remember he said there's a show at the British Museum, I think it was, about how sculptures were in fact completely painted. So the British Museum made an exhibition where they showed how Greek sculptures were really, at the time, I mean, we live in this funny misunderstanding that Greek sculptures were white, but they were not. They were vividly painted with gold and like very strong colors, and then time took the color away, and between Renaissance and Neoclassicism they convinced us that this is how they were, but they were not. So I remember Daniel telling me, because I mean, when I'm in London I go to see contemporary art. I don't, British Museum is not on the top of my list, and I remember Daniel telling me, you must go. And this was actually such a great moment, because it's how you learn about history through living artists, and I think it's the best way. Especially as somebody working with artists, it's better than any art history class. So we moved.
Maybe before we move, because you spoke about erosion, Greek sculptures being made by time, by sand in the wind and different civilizations knocking them down. So you can see that the faces in the white marble sculpture eroded, and then the two large sculptures, they are made from marble, but the marble, I didn't do much to it. So I found these pieces of marble in Italy, and I just kind of put them together like a collage, because you see, like the one on the right, there's the torso, and then there's the Brancusi-like head, and the one here on the left, there's the torso and a bronze head. So it was very much an act of finding, but like an archaeologist. Now so Bloomberg offices, Michael Bloomberg's offices are built on an archaeological space, and the deal he did with London is that he opened a museum underneath the space so that it could be used, and they invite artists to do projects there. And these works are 3 meters high, and they originally made in clay the original sculptures with a dancer in my studio, and then made big. It's bronze, but not cast bronze, sprayed bronze. And I was interested at that time in our relationship with a sculpture. So if the scale changes, do we experience it totally differently? And maybe this scale makes us really kind of see a leg as something which is totally different. Maybe even we feel it more like children experience it. But they do as well have very much, especially that one on the right, a kind of sense of coming from a different time.
So here, I think again with the idea of a sculpture that can take so many shapes. I mean, mannequins. I
Yeah.
mean, we don't think about them as sculptures, but here they are. I mean, from Tutankhamun's sarcophagus to the mannequin you see in the shop, it's very easy to make the connection. So
And these are very specific mannequins. So there was a company in the 60s called Edel Ruchtin Mannequins, and she took real people, and she took like not models even, like people in the street or famous people, and she would get a sculptor to sculpt them because she really didn't like the mannequins available. So her mannequins, or the Ruchtin mannequins, which became very famous in the 80s, had something of real people in them. So what I did is I started buying these mannequins and taking, you see, the heads are not mannequin heads, the heads are marble. So playing on this idea that, these are modern day Greek sculptures, but with marble heads. And the ones on the left, are a different group, or maybe a third generation of the mannequins. And there I was thinking about dance. And the funny thing, or the coincidence about it, is that those mannequins have now been purchased by a fashion company who are reproducing them as
mannequins.
But they had to make some alterations and changes because my mannequins are a bit overweight, and and the arms are up, which is not what you would like in a fashion shop or whatever.
Before we move, I want to ask you, because you spoke about we spoke about mannequins and Freud, and it's actually something that just came to my mind. If you were ever attracted by surrealism, because I think your work is not at the way it appears doesn't have this connection, but now that we are going through this, there's and if you don't know, I mean, mannequins were very much an obsession of surrealist artists. Not all of them, but many of them had a fetish for mannequins. And again, I want to bring art history in a playful way, and I wonder if it's something that or if anyone ever wrote about your work in this context. I would be surprised, but I want to.
There's one table in the walking tables as you walk in. It's called Singing, and when I look at that one, I kind of see a kind of surreal movement within it. That they are very. Maybe when I think about, say, Picabia and her the paintings there, they are something I can relate to very much. And maybe there's so many kinds of surrealist art, so maybe you pick on different moments within it. But I think that there is something there, and no one's
no one ever. Yeah,
maybe that's the next.
That's
project.
the next project. Yeah, yeah. No, I also think about this imagination in a way that to think that mannequins can dance and become marbles. It can only happen in a dream. Okay, so here we are. This is
from the summer, and this is this recent body of work which I'm showing here as well, which is fired clay, then painted with oil paint. And these ones are more like totems. This one, the middle here, is called After Frank Auerbach, and those ones have references to the color of paint that they painted in. And these are a similar and different group. This was more, the title of this show was Looking, so the idea was that these objects look at you when you come into the space. But maybe from these images we can see that there's this kind of evolution in the work which has come to do with painting. So there's a sculpture which is then very much painted, and that the process of painting is very much about painting.
Yeah. As Daniel was saying, this exhibition has elements that are very similar to what we have here at CCA, and it would be great if you could tell us how these figures came into reality, from which memory. And just to say this, I just want to give you a hint on if you will see the exhibition space. I mean, our exhibition space is really, really white. But for this exhibition, we made it even more white. Anything that could be in the space that is not the work is white. The frames are white, the pedestals are white. And this was actually, I was suggesting this to Daniel because I wanted you to come in the space of memory. Because these are related to the memory of the artist, and I felt the white would kind of make the imagination blossom. Mm-hmm. So if you can tell
When I was about autobiographical, when I was about 13 or 14, I had a scholarship to study at the Israel Museum with an artist called Michael Kovner, who's a painter. And after and before the class, the museum was closed, but I would walk around the museum, and I would see, ancient Greek artifacts next to, in my mind, a Picasso or, a Julian Schnabel exhibition. And for me, they came from the same space, and I think that was like a moment of understanding. And the chorus downstairs, the starting point for that work is 18 sculptures that were found in Petach Tikva 3,000 years ago, and they are my bouncing board, my reflecting place, and I go back to them. I'm not copying them. I'm looking at them. I'm taking a face from an eye from one, a nose from the other. They are a place for me to go to. And then the tables I make with a dancer, or the objects which are on the dancer called Darren from Sharon Eyal Dance Company, who comes to my studio for 3-4 days, and he dances, and I make objects in clay while he's there. I am not sculpting him. I am not trying to copy him. It's more a kind of collaboration of two people. You could say he's dancing with his body, I'm dancing with my hands. At the end, there is objects which then, from them I choose the ones which are worthy of surviving, and those ones then are fired and get painted. But it's a kind of a collaboration, and we've done it a few times already, and he brings the music, and it's a very interesting process.
And they all sit on these walking tables. These are tables that they have legs, but the legs are walking, so to speak.
I think it's a bit about like the idea of migration, idea of movement, what we carry with us, the migrating Jew as well. And our relationship to tables, because we eat at the table, certain things happen at the table that don't happen, even this table here. And I'm interested in that space as a kind of a ground for action.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much. I want to ask if there's any question.
Daniel, you talk a lot about dance, and as a former dancer, I relate to your work, and I think that dance is about movement in space. And actually, you kind of have the role of a choreographer, because you also choreograph the way the audience or the people viewing your work, they are moving in space, and in in relation to that, I want to, you said in the beginning that you're a maker. Now, for me, looking at your work, for me, you're not only a maker of sculptures, you're making of spaces and environments, because your installations are very, it's not only about the specific sculpture, right? It's, and also I wanted to ask you another thing, is that, do you feel, I feel that there is, for you as a maker, where you when you work with a material, right, it's a very physical, especially with clay, it's a very physical experience, right? And you also, and there is another physical element when the people are watching your installations and are moving in them, right? So do you like feel that there is a correlation between those two things?
For the first part of the question, you know, I make objects, and the same way that I made objects 15 years ago, and I try to find a context for them, a base, a body. In the same way, the stage here was very clear that they needed this stage, and they had this a similar stage in my studio, and the works on paper, I wanted them to be like windows outside of this space. So I think it's to do, what I'm trying to say is that I think it's to do that when you understand the object that you've made very clearly and you know what it wants, so you know where it wants to go as well. So it's a certain kind of intimacy with the object, living with the object in the studio, that then when it wants to go into the space, you're very clear. And I think we were both very clear where this would go. You know, and with the tables, we wanted to create a procession. So, and we didn't want it to be too, you know, formal. They wanted to move towards, you know, the chorus.
I think if I can add, I think, Tamar, your question makes a lot of sense, and I think an answer is also the title of the exhibition in Scotland, Looking, because looking basically is telling you it's not only you looking at the work, but the work is looking at you. So when you're saying, are you thinking, you know, people, in fact, yes, they are looking at you and you are going around them. So there's this, of course, they are aware. There's an awareness of these objects that are in the space of other objects, living objects, people that are in the space. So I think with the title, I think it was a way to say it, of course, in a very, you know, maybe poetic way. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the choice of the very thin tabletops and the very big feet, legs, shoes, whatever you choose to name them, beneath?
I knew I wanted to make tables, and I was just thinking about like an ideas around designing tables for my works, and I don't like that space where I have to become a decision maker of, you know, design objects. It's not what I'm interested in doing, and I just had the very clear, like a moment, like, hey, okay, I'll make the legs, and I just made the legs, and they are a bit like animal legs. They're a bit goofy. They look like a bit like a camel that's going to fall, but they're exactly what I wanted. And they have this kind of, they're a bit funny as well, and they carry a lot of what I want underneath the table to have, because it's a sculpture. It's not a, you know, it has to function. Yeah.
Very powerful, you said. I agree.
I'm curious about the fact that they're open top, the chorus, and hollow, like vessels. If you can speak about that, if that sort of originated here or before.
Yeah, it's happened around because I was making these totems, and these totems are hollow. And I see them as like internal parts of the body, like veins that carry information upwards. And when I set out to make the object, it wasn't so much clear that they're going to become so clearly figurative, although those are figurative as well, because they don't look like bodies, but they do feel. So I set out to make something like that, and then it became a face, and I kind of allowed it, and I kind of didn't want to close them. I don't know, I wanted to leave that you can, even from here it's quite nice because you can see inside, you can see the history of the painting. You can see that they in a way made as well by the painting. I think it's something to do with kind of energy going up, and if it's closed, it's stuck. And this way it's allowed to flow.
Breathing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you,
Thank you
Nicola.
for coming, and